talking about the evidence you've got. It's got nothing to do with what those courts have.
Do you have any idea how the law works?
Wait,
do you want me to break the law in a federal judge's order?
No, I want you to follow your own word, Director Patel. You said up there it was under the direct control of the FBI director. He had the black book.
Everything I have direct control over, we have gone to court. You haven't.
Complete your sentence. Everything you have direct control over, you said.
Have gone to court, and everything we have direct control over.
Complete your sentence. You said everything.
We're releasing.
He'd like to complete his answer.
You began the sentence, everything you have direct control over, and then you stopped that sentence. You've released everything that you have direct control over?
And I have direct control over and can lawfully release. If you're not familiar with the court orders, that's not my fault.
Oh, I'm perfectly familiar with them. But how did we prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell?
She was prosecuted with the investigatory material that was collected from 2001 and 2005. Because of the non-prosecution agreements and the court orders on the investigations and search warrants, we were not able to develop new information. And oh, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein was out for 12 years, and the Obama and Biden administration did nothing to look at his work, his pedophile network. If you want to blame me, that's fine. But now you're blaming the men and women who conducted this great search.
I'm not blaming anybody.
For seconds. That is the exact duration of the calculated pause that paralyzed a high-stakes congressional oversight hearing, capturing the moment the most powerful law enforcement official in the United States confronted his own unfinished sentence. For 4 seconds, a room filled with lawmakers, federal staff, and media cameras watched the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation weigh the legal consequences of finishing his statement out loud under oath. What appeared to the public as a routine bureaucratic stumble was something far more significant. It was the precise moment an absolute public promise met the uncompromising wall of federal institutional reality. This investigation looks past the partisan performance art of congressional subcommittees to implement a strict tracking metric, the Promise Audit. We place the explicit public declarations made by Kash Patel before he acquired power directly alongside his documented administrative actions after taking office to complete the narrative that stopped midair on the congressional floor. The structural reality of the Jeffrey Epstein investigative files is defined by immense scale and systemic fragmentation, encompassing an archive that the Department of Justice officially identified as containing approximately 6 million total pages of highly sensitive documentation. Within this massive institutional cache are intercepted digital communications, international financial ledgers, flight records, and classified reports compiled across decades of law enforcement operations. By the summer of 2026, official production metrics confirmed that approximately 3.5 million pages had been processed and produced by the agency. This leaves an estimated 2.5 million pages completely unreleased to the American public, a massive evidentiary deficit that remains locked behind closed doors under a director who previously built his entire public platform on the promise of immediate, uncompromised disclosure.
Thank you, member, if you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for saying that. The whole country reacted with horror and shock to the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk in cold blood. And there is never any warrant for political violence in America. And just as we all recoiled together at the shocking assassination of Melissa Hortman and others who died in that Minnesota attack.
In December 2023, Kash Patel occupied a highly influential position within American political media, operating as a former high-ranking defense and intelligence official whose commentary carried the weight of insider access. Free from the immediate boundaries of bureaucratic accountability, he routinely constructed a public narrative centered on absolute executive authority. His public statements regarding the Epstein Black Book were delivered with total certainty, framing the disclosure of the files not as a complex legal procedure, but as a direct test of political courage and institutional will. By telling his audience that the record was under the direct, unmediated control of the FBI director, he established a clear baseline expectation for his future tenure. This declarative framing deliberately stripped away the nuance of federal record laws, presenting the public with a straightforward equation: an anti-establishment director in the chair would mean the immediate end of institutional secrecy.
Recoiled together at the shocking assassination of Melissa Hortman and others who died in that Minnesota attack. We all stand together categorically against political violence in America and determined to end these cycles of of political violence that have traumatized the country.
All said. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt, to lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
Simple, a single word that defined the outsider's critique of federal law enforcement. In 2023, Kash Patel asserted that the sole variable preventing the exposure of the Epstein network was a deliberate effort to shield the powerful individuals named within the files. There was no mention of constitutional boundaries, grand jury secrecy mandates, or judicial oversight. However, when the calendar flipped to 2026 and Patel assumed the actual directorship of the Bureau, the geometry of the argument underwent an immediate transformation. Confronted by congressional investigators under oath, the narrative of simple political will vanished, replaced by a complex network of administrative defenses, court orders, and references to historical constraints. The director actively defended the sluggish pace of the disclosure by pointing to the decisions of the Obama and Biden administrations, and citing search warrant limitations that had been baked into the case file 2 decades prior. This sudden shift creates an unavoidable logical contradiction. If the 2023 assessment was accurate, then the current retention of the files must be recognized as a deliberate choice by the current leadership. If the 2026 administrative excuses are valid, then the original promises made to the public were fundamentally detached from the realities of federal law. To understand the deep legal conflict governing these files, one must look closely at the foundational document that has restricted every federal investigator since 2008, the highly controversial Southern District of Florida Non-Prosecution Agreement. Under this historical arrangement, federal prosecutors effectively shut down a sweeping raw investigation in exchange for a localized plea, embedding a unique clause that protected any unnamed co-conspirators from future federal prosecution within that jurisdiction. This agreement severely limited the operational reach of the FBI, binding subsequent search warrants to a rigid timeline between 2006 and 2008. The director emphasized these constraints during his testimony, arguing that the Bureau cannot simply bypass historical judicial boundaries without compromising the constitutional integrity of the justice system. Yet, this defensive posture faced a major challenge from within the federal judiciary itself when Representative Eric Swalwell introduced a critical perspective into the hearing record. A sitting federal judge, Senior District Judge Richard Berman of the Southern District of New York, had officially stated that the sheer volume of non-grand jury material held by the Department of Justice completely dwarfs the narrow categories protected by grand jury secrecy rules. This judicial clarification effectively dismantled the argument that the entire archive was legally locked down by the courts, proving that millions of pages of raw evidence, operational files, and administrative records remained entirely clear of those specific statutory restrictions. Institutional transparency is rarely managed in a vacuum. It is meticulously engineered behind closed doors by legal and communications teams. Internal oversight documentation emerging from congressional briefings reveals that throughout 2025, a series of highly sensitive Situation Room meetings took place involving Director Patel, Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and senior White House staff. According to these internal reports, the primary objective of these high-level sessions was to establish a selective processing framework for the Epstein files, specifically prioritizing the review and release of document segments that demonstrated the current president had no involvement with the trafficking network. This methodology represents an approach focused on narrative management rather than objective public disclosure, allowing the administration to project an image of total transparency while keeping the most sensitive contents of the remaining 2.5 million pages insulated from public scrutiny. This pattern of strategic containment became explicitly clear during the sudden, unannounced transfer of Ghislaine Maxwell from a high-security environment to a low-intensity, minimum-security federal facility colloquially referred to by inmates as a country club. When oversight lawmakers attempted to force accountability by issuing a formal subpoena to the director of the Bureau of Prisons to explain this structural downgrading, the legislative mechanism was immediately blocked along party lines, with every Republican on the committee except one voting no.
Upon your confirmation, you promised that, quote, there will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, no stone left unturned. and anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. This spring, you ordered hundreds of agents to pore over all the Epstein files, but not to look for more clues about the money network or the network of human traffickers. You pulled these agents from their regular counterterrorism or drug trafficking duties to work around the clock, some of them sleeping at their desks, to conduct a frantic search to make sure Donald Trump's name and image were flagged and redacted wherever they appeared, whether an email, a text, a letter, an interview, a photograph, or a video. In May, Attorney General Bondi reportedly told Trump that his name had indeed appeared multiple times throughout the Epstein files, and not long thereafter.
This unconventional line of questioning was far more than an exercise in political theater. It was the formal introduction of character evidence regarding the director's own documented self-conception. By authoring a children's book series where his literal alter ego, Kash the Knight, executes personalized executive mandates to purge political adversaries from the kingdom, Patel explicitly committed his worldview to the public record. This published perspective views the nation's premier law enforcement agency not as an independent, constitutionally neutral institution bound by objective statutes, but as an active weapon of partisan conflict. When this unique self-conception is evaluated alongside the administrative gridlock of 2026, the underlying strategy becomes clear. When populist rhetoric transitions into actual executive authority, the preservation of the narrative takes precedence over the execution of the promise. This high-stakes environment of narrative control was further exposed during a critical exchange with Representative Dan Goldman, who asked the director point-blank whether Donald Trump's identity appeared anywhere within the unreleased segments of the Epstein investigative cache. Rather than delivering a direct, categorical denial, which would instantly neutralize the political attack if factually supported, the director stalled, repeatedly redirecting the committee to a generic, heavily redacted administrative index. This refusal to provide a definitive answer under oath occurred alongside unverified reports from Raskin's office indicating that Attorney General Pam Bondi had privately informed the president in May that his name did cross-reference within certain files, highlighting the immense legal and political risks managed daily behind the scenes. As this conflict moves beyond the walls of the committee room, the ultimate fate of this archive will be determined by three active legal and political vectors that operate completely independent of the Bureau's internal timeline. The first is the critical discovery phase of the Driscoll civil lawsuit, where three highly decorated former FBI agents, Brian Driscoll, Stephen Jensen, and Spencer Evans, are pursuing a formal action against the leadership of the Bureau over unlawful, politically motivated personnel decisions. If this lawsuit survives initial executive motions, federal civil discovery rules will empower the plaintiff's legal team to compel the production of internal communications, emails, and Situation Room minutes from late 2025, effectively bypassing the standard classification filters used by the executive branch to manage public disclosure. The second vector is the highly volatile legislative battle over independent financial records, marked by a razor-thin committee vote that narrowly blocked immediate subpoenas to major international banking groups targeting over $1.5 billion in flagged Epstein transactions. The third and most unpredictable vector is the acceleration of private disclosures originating entirely outside federal custody, demonstrated by the Epstein estate twice bypassing the FBI to hand over materials, including a Maxwell-compiled birthday book containing an alleged Trump note, directly to Congress. With independent archives holding missing pieces of the puzzle, the administrative shield faces an inevitable breakdown. The incomplete sentence recorded on the congressional floor remains the defining monument of this era of governance, capturing the exact moment the language of public exposure transitioned into the reality of institutional containment. The director did not finish the statement because he understood a permanent truth of federal power, that the tools of institutional secrecy are far too valuable to be dismantled by the individuals who inherit them. We present the verified public record, leaving the final analysis entirely to the community. We have two distinct questions for the AVA Reports audience to evaluate within the comments section right now. First, do you believe the extensive federal court orders cited under oath represent a genuine, insurmountable barrier to disclosure, or are they being deployed as a convenient administrative shield to manage political risk? Second, as the parallel civil actions move forward into discovery, do you believe private litigation investigation will force the unredacted truth into the public domain before the Bureau ever completes its official processing. Drop your assessment below. The analytical debate in this comment section actively shapes our tracking of this ongoing investigation. We remain committed to documenting what the official record actually reveals, completely free from the sensationalism designed for clicks. Subscribe to AVA Reports, activate the notification bell, and track this case as it moves through the next phase of federal discovery. The next chapter of this investigation is already in motion.
Stakes are simply too high.